Disclaimer. This is recorded on the PTR, and it's entirely possible mechanics look, behave, or are tuned differently on live servers. In addition, these are just early strategies we made on the PTR, and especially on the later bosses, should only be used as a reference for what the boss abilities do. Nek'zali the Soulcoiler is a two-phase encounter where the boss will try to overwhelm you with the skeletons of dead Amani, which walk slowly towards the Soulcoil well in the middle of the room. The fight will begin with Soulcoil Ignition, which will just deal damage and leave swirlies you'll need to move out of. The boss does not move during this channel. The boss will then debuff several players with Essence Rend. This dispellable debuff does damage, and when it's dispelled, will leave a puddle that will slowly rotate around the room clockwise relative to where you dropped it. So you'll want to move out to the edge of the arena to save on space before you get dispelled. There are two tank mechanics on this fight: Hollowing Strikes, which is a stacking dot and healing reduction, and Possession Barrage. Possession Barrage will target the current tank, and after a long cast will start a channel that shoots out spirits towards their location. These spirits deal drop-off damage, so the tank wants to move away from the raid, but they can also be intercepted by players standing in the path between the boss and the tank that is targeted, so make sure you give the tank room. The last mechanic of this phase is Restless Amani. Spirits will fly towards these caskets that are along the edges of the room and begin to glow. You'll want to move your raid towards the largest amount of lit caskets, as shortly afterwards, raised Amani will spawn from those and begin walking towards the Soulcoil well in the middle of the room. You must prevent these adds from reaching the well. These adds are fully CCable and will spawn at other lit caskets throughout the room, so you'll need to keep an eye out, because if an add reaches the middle, it will explode, dealing damage and apply a raid-wide dot. These adds have a magic absorb shield for 25% of their health that must be broken, which will be important later. When the boss reaches 50% HP, she'll run back to the middle of the room and start the intermission. During this time, the boss will summon the Echo of Jahwe. This Echo of Jahwe will begin a long cast called Soul Transfer. When the cast finishes, it will deal a bunch of damage, and afterwards, the add will become active. The Echo of Jahwe basically has one spell, which is called Hungering Pyre. But before we talk about that, do you remember those Restless Amani adds you killed earlier? They didn't die permanently. If you broke their shields, they left their skeletons behind, and you just need to remove them, or else they'll resurrect again. Hungering Pyre is how you do this. This is a group soak centered on the current tank, which will remove any skeletons in that area. In addition, any players who do not soak this will be affected by slithering flames afterwards. This is a short debuff that gives those players the ability to burn any skeletons around them. So you want tanks and melee to help with the initial tank soak, and have healers in range get the slithering flames and clean up the rest of the room. Once you defeat the first Echo of Jahwe, a second one will spawn opposite of where the first one spawned, and you repeat until that second one dies, and then you'll re-enter into Phase 2. Phase 2 is mostly a burn phase, and you may want to save Lust for this, as once the boss reaches 100 energy in this phase, she'll enrage. She gains energy passively over time, and whenever a skeleton reaches the well. Nek'zali retains many of the same abilities she had in the first phase, but gains an additional one called Invoke. Invoke will cause the rotating pools you left with the debuffs to jump to a new location. From here, you just need to continue to deal with Restless Amani, spawning, and burn the boss while cleaving down the adds before you either get overwhelmed from the number of adds or the boss enrages. On Mythic, there are a few changes. The biggest change is that the boss will cast Grasping Depths, which will suck players towards the well. You will need to have a group of players, usually melee, one tank, and a healer, to stand in the well to be teleported inside of it. There, you will need to kill a Drowned Echo add, otherwise the well will keep pulsing damage upstairs. This Drowned Echo add will continually spawn these rotating adds around it that you'll need to avoid, and has an interrupt called Soulcoiler's Curse, which will eject players if not interrupted. Once the add is killed, the players downstairs will be stunned, and then sent back upstairs when that stun wears off, gaining the Soul Exhaustion debuff, preventing them from going down again for a time. In testing, this seemed to happen periodically throughout the fight, and the debuff fell off before you needed to go down again, but this may be different on live, and you may need two groups of players instead. Lastly, on Mythic, The invoke cast in the last phase will now interrupt and silence players for 3 seconds if they are casting. That does it for this boss. Moving on to the next boss, Entombed Sentinels. The Entombed Sentinels is a split cleave fight with 2 bosses and an interesting math-related intermission. To start off, you'll want to split your raid in half as these bosses pulse a stacking debuff to players within 40 yards. This means you'll need to swap sides after each intermission. The breath of it will attack is the poison themed of the 2 bosses. This boss will cast Venom Coagulation, which will spawn a big slime ad that pulses damage onto the group. You'll want to drag the boss on top of this ad to cleave it down efficiently. Toxic droplets will spawn these soak puddles near where players are standing that you'll need to soak, otherwise they'll explode. Important to note that these soak puddles will spawn across the room from the other group as well, and you can sort of bait these to spawn closer together since they do spawn near player locations. On the other side of the room, the blood of Ulitech will cast Unstable Miasma. This is a group soak on a random player. After soaking it, you'll get a debuff, and then when this short debuff expires, you'll drop a blood pool where you are standing. You'll want to have everyone on your side soak this, and then stay grouped to drop your pools before moving away. There's a magic dispel called Blighted Blood that you'll need to dispel that just does damage. It's important to note that all blood-related debuffs will drop a puddle, with the size being larger relative to how potent the venom would have been. This is really only important for the tank debuff, which the tank will have to put in a corner after they swap sides. When the bosses reach 100 energy, they will rush to the middle of the room and begin channeling Vitriolic Stasis. This causes both bosses to take 99% reduced damage and will equalize their health over 30 seconds. While they do this, every player will become affected by Helkial Toxins. You'll have these icons over your head and you have to watch to find someone that will make the total sum of each of your debuffs reach 4. So 2 and 2 would match with another 2 and 2, 3 and 1 would match with the opposite color 3 and 1. You want to take your time doing this because if you collide with a player with the wrong debuff, then you'll be both doomed to die at the end of this intermission and spawn a massive blood pool. Messing this mechanic up is pretty much the only way to wipe on this fight. From here, you'll just repeat the phases but swap sides. The room will start to fill up with blood pools slowly, so you'll need to rotate your positioning appropriately to avoid running out of space. The blood pools do despawn after a time, but it takes a while. That sums up the fight on Heroic. On Mythic, there is one new mechanic. Vashnik the Malignant will show up and afflict several players with shifting proto-venom. This puts an orange circle around roughly 4 players per side, and those players need to collide with another player affected by this debuff to resolve it. However, if a player affected by this debuff touches another player without it, it will knock that player away and deal a bunch of damage. Essentially, you just want to see when this mechanic is coming out, and spread out preemptively and try to give the affected players the right of way to allow them to clear quickly. There is a little gotcha part to this mechanic where the timing can line up where this happens right before intermission phase. If you are still affected by the Mythic debuff when the intermission happens, you automatically fail the intermission mechanic and will die and spawn a big blood pool, creating some urgency to resolving this mechanic quickly. From what I could tell, this can affect everyone, including tanks, so you'll just need to stay aware. That does it for this boss. Moving on to the next boss, the Lost Explorers. The Lost Explorers is a 3-target spread cleave fight where only 2 bosses can be sacked at a time. It's also a pick your poison type fight where each of the Tortolans has an ultimate effect and the order of which you deal with them is up to you. There are 3 Tortolan bosses on this fight, Gebo, Nama, and Iku, as well as an untargetable troll boss named Morzahi. Morzahi will spawn swirlies and pulse damage onto players, but he also has an energy bar. If this energy bar ever reaches 100, he will begin a channel that will wipe your raid, but more on how to prevent that later. Moving on to the Tortolans themselves, only Nama and Iku are tankable, whereas Gebo will walk in a counterclockwise circle around the room the entire fight. We'll start with Nama. Nama's main mechanic is United Defense. This prevents you from stacking all 3 turtles together, as will give them a 99% damage reduction. However, you can stack one of the turtles on Gebo as he moves and cleave 2 at once. Nama's other mechanic is Shell Spin. This will shoot 3 turtle shells towards a random nearby player that will stun for 4 seconds if you get hit by them. Lastly, the tank swap mechanic causes you to gain a stacking physical damage taken debuff from Nama. Iku is the other tankable turtle, and her main mechanic is Blink Nova. She will target a random player, and then when that debuff expires, she will teleport to the location and deal fall-off damage to all players. You usually want to take this in front of wherever you're moving with Iku, but this can change based on the timing in the encounter. Iku has an interruptible cast called Icebound Flames. If this is not interrupted, it will deal a ton of damage and apply a dispellable dot. Her tank mechanic is Shredding Shards. This is a channel that does a ton of frost damage and applies a stacking debuff with each hit that increases damage taken from this mechanic by 50%. I'd recommend using a strong defensive on this as a tank because it was even breaking through AMS. Lastly, we have Gebo. Gebo's main mechanic is Throw Junk. This will create these brown swirlies you need to move out of, as well as spawning a crate. Running over these crates gives a stacking bleed debuff, but you need to do so because if you don't run over a crate, after 25 seconds it will explode. The most important mechanic of the fight is every so often, one of these crates will contain a disgusting fish, indicated by a timer. A player can run over this fish to collect it, which will give them an extra action button. This extra action button needs to be used on one of the turtles before Morzahi reaches full energy, and will reset his energy when done so. However, depending on which turtle you have fed the fish to, they will cast an ultimate ability. They will cast this twice in succession, and you'll need to feed each of the turtles once, because after feeding them once, you cannot feed the same one again. Nama's ultimate ability is Mighty Thud. This will target 3 players. In the latest testing, this was 1 healer, 1 melee DPS, and 1 range DPS, with a soak circle. Shortly afterwards, he will leap to those players in a sequential order and deal massive physical split damage and knock those players back, as well as leaving behind a void zone where those players were standing. It was possible in testing to have the first group get knocked backwards into the third group's soak to make it easier. Iku's ultimate ability is Frostfire Volley. This will mark melee with a frost debuff and range with a fire debuff indicated by these circles. When the debuff expires, it will create a frost or fire circle on the ground, as well as giving you a 1 minute long dot. To remove these dots, as well as the puddles in the ground, debuff players need to run into an opposite colored circle. We just had melee players drop their circle closer to the middle, and range along the edge, and had range move forward, and melee move backwards to get rid of the circles. Gebo's ultimate ability is Mushroom Toss and Explosive Surprise. Gebo will spawn many mushrooms near player locations, as well as debuffing 1 player with Explosive Surprise. This debuff player needs to run away from the group, because when their debuff expires, Gebo will toss a bomb at their location. When the bomb detonates, it will create this slow-moving firewall, which you will need to run into the mushrooms to knock yourself up and over the flame wall of doom. You need to be careful though, it's possible to activate the mushrooms early, and they quickly expire after someone has touched them. You can also use displacement effects like Blink and Transcendence to cheese this mechanic. Finally, you need to kill the turtles at the same time, because each turtle has a unique and scary enrage mechanic if one of their allies dies before they do that you don't want to deal with. This will require you to actively swap which turtles are close together for cleave purposes. And that sums up the fight on Heroic. You just need to cycle through the ultimates, and the bosses will fall over. On Mythic, there are a few changes. When you soak a crate, it applies the bleed to the entire raid, meaning you need to coordinate when people are soaking these. There is only 1 mushroom when Mushroom Toss and Bomb combo happens, requiring you to coordinate when you are running into it, as running into it earlier by mistake will result in a wipe. And that's Lost Explorers on Heroic and Mythic difficulty. Moving on to the next boss, Vashnik the Malignant. Vashnik the Malignant is a pick your poison ad slop fight. First thing you'll notice upon entering combat is that there are these 3 fountains around the room, with the orange one being on the left, purple on the right, and the red one in the back of the room. These will matter a lot in this fight because of Vashnik's main ability, Imbibe. Vashnik will spawn slime ads from the 2 fountains he is closest to, as well as gaining a buff that will make subsequent ad spawns of the same fountains have more HP and deal more damage. You basically just want to rotate Vashnik around the room to prevent this from stacking up as much as possible. As for the slime ads themselves, the orange slimes will explode on death and apply a short, stacking dot. You want to ideally stagger killing these to not get multiple stacks of the dot at once. The shadow ads will leave purple swirlies you need to move out of, as well as they have an absorb shield for 100% of their HP. The red ad will spawn smaller ads when it dies, and is the only slime ad that is immune to CC. These slime ads will try to walk towards the middle of the room, and if they reach it, they will explode and deal a bunch of raid damage. Death grip is really useful in this fight for grouping up these ads, especially with the orange slimes, as you can death grip them in staggered while you cleave the boss. Depending on the slimes you decided to spawn, Vashnik will also gain abilities based on the buffs he gained from spawning those slimes. For red, he gains Siphoning Infection, which will debuff several players with a dot that is also a healing absorb and prevents those players from being healed. Other players will need to stand in their soak circle, which will cause them to leech health from those players to remove it. For orange, he gains Exploding Infection. This is a magic dispellable debuff that deals damage when removed. For purple, he gains Stygian Infection, which applies a massive healing absorb to several players, and when it is removed, those players deal shadow damage to players within 6 yards of them, so those players will need to spread out a bit. As for other abilities, Vashnik will channel Malignant Catalyst towards the well in the middle of the room, and then spawn green soaks on the ground, sort of near where he was standing when he was channeling it. Several players will be affected by Plague Froth. This is a short debuff that when it expires will shoot out plague waves from the affected players in their cardinal directions. You want to aim these waves away from the group. That about sums up the fight on Heroic. You just want to work your way around the room, deal with the slime ads while killing the boss. On Mythic, there are a few changes. Imbibe will spawn Malignant Totems. In testing, these were called tumors, but the most recent journal refers to them as totems. I'm not sure if they have the same functionality or not. These totems will start a long cast that will wipe your raid, but you can use the plague waves from Plague Froth debuffs to destroy them. You have 2 set of Plague Froth debuffs to do so. The Siphon Blood mechanic from earlier applies a debuff that makes you take more damage when you soak it. I didn't really notice this in testing, so just don't soak this if you have a debuff. Exploding Infection needs to be dispelled immediately, as it gains a stack every 1.5 seconds. And that about sums up the evil snake man Vashnik. Moving on to the next boss, Sszorak. Sszorak is a single target encounter with knockback mechanics and an intermission that will blow you away. The main mechanic of this fight is Howling Maelstrom. Around the room there are these tunnels, and Sszorak will mark some of these with either 1, 2, or 3 wind orbs. This will be important later when the intermission happens, as it indicates the order that the wind tunnels will activate, but more on that later. The tank mechanic of this fight is Apex Predator. The boss will execute a combo of mechanics: Ravage, which is a physical damage tank soak, Mutilate, which is a group soak that applies a poison dot, and Tempest, which spawns poison tornadoes that will bounce around the arena. There will always be 2 Ravages, 2 Mutilates, and 1 Tempest, but the order this occurs is entirely random. Taunting during the cast of these will change where the boss is facing, so you want to wait until after the mechanics resolve before taunting. You also need 2 groups of players to soak Mutilate, which should be roughly half of your raid, as the damage the dot does scales with the amount of players who soak it, and it stacks, so you don't want to have to heal through that. If you get hit by a Tempest Tornado, it will apply a poison dispellable dot and slow that stacks. The boss will cast Venomous Surge, which will spawn poison pools in an area around him. These pools will persist throughout the fight, and notably can be blown off the platform during the intermission. Also, when the channel ends, it will debuff 2 range players with a debuff that when it expires, will spawn a viscous cyst at their location. These cysts will explode when you come into contact with them, which will knock back all players, deal big damage, and apply a short debuff that slows players, but more importantly makes them adhere to the ground, making you less susceptible to wind knockbacks. You'll want to place these in locations sort of opposite of where you'll be blown to during the intermission, indicated by the wind tunnels, as they will be crucial to preventing you from wiping. The last mechanic in this phase is Raging Crosswinds. This will place a debuff and a blue circle on majority of the raid. There will also be a blue line sticking out. This indicates the direction you will be knocked when the debuff expires. You can deal with this mechanic in one of two ways. If everyone in your raid has a way to cancel a knockback, you can just simply spread out and deal with it that way. Or, the intended method is to line up next to someone who has the opposite direction line of you and get knocked into them, which will prevent you from getting blown off the platform. Finally, at about 1:50 and 4 minutes and 10 seconds into the fight, the boss will cast Howling Maelstrom and dig in. The Howling Maelstrom will begin to push you aggressively in the order of the wind orbs, and dig in will make the boss stationary during this phase and take 30% more damage for 25 seconds. You want to pop the Sis as you're being blown, which will knock you forward and make you resistant to the pushback, then repeat this 3 times. During this time, any poison pools will also be pushed back and possibly blown off the platform. After 25 seconds, the pushback will end and you'll re-enter phase 1 and repeat the mechanics. There will be, however, an extra cyst available that you'll need to pop or it will expire after 2 minutes and explode anyway. You can use this to reposition after this phase or maybe negate a Raging Cross Winds. That sums up the fight on Heroic. On Mythic, there are a few changes. Serpent's Fury will mark a player and cause the boss to gain energy over time. If the boss reaches 100 energy, he will enrage and deal 500% increased damage to the end of the fight. To prevent this, at least 14 players need to stack within 8 yards of the marked player, which will cause the boss to cast To the Slaughter. This will deal a large amount of physical damage and apply a short debuff called Virulence. This debuff will give you these blaze-like lines, where you need to quickly spread out and avoid clipping other players with your debuff, because if you get hit by someone else's debuff, it will apply Virulence to you again. You now need at least 5 players to soak Mutilate, or it will kill the players struck. And that's Sszorak on Heroic and Mythic difficulty. Moving on to the next boss, the Twin Fangs. Twin Fangs is a 2-target encounter with priority add spawns, with Vexul being the poison-themed snake and Ithraz being the blood-themed snake. The main mechanic of this fight is Eternal Venom. Being struck by poison-themed abilities applies a stack of this debuff. If you ever reach 10 stacks, you die instantly. Each snake has its own set of mechanics, and we'll start with Vexul. Vexul's tank mechanic is Caustic Deluge. This is a channeled beam that applies a debuff that increases the damage taken by Caustic Deluge by 10%. This will also spawn Caustic Globules as it channels, which need to be soaked and will apply a stack of Eternal Venom to the player that soaked them. Vexul will also spawn adds with Venomous Emergence. These adds will spawn in the small middle area behind you and begin casting Corrosive Spit at players, which is this line mechanic that will deal damage and apply Eternal Venom to players hit. You want to swap to and kill these ASAP to reduce the amount of venom stacks that are applied. Stir the Depths will cause Vexul to do a little wiggle dance and then summon acid waves that travel throughout the platform. You need to dodge these waves as they will apply Eternal Venom. Moving on to Ithraz. Ithraz's tank mechanic is Stone Breaker. Ithraz will knock back players, then spawn these 3 brown soak circles in a sequential order. The tank tanking Ithraz wants to focus on the order these spawned in so they can soak them. If the soak is missed, it'll do big raid damage and knock everyone back. Once you soak these, it'll apply a debuff that increases your damage taken from Stonebreaker by 33%, and this effect stacks. If for some reason you spaced out or something and you didn't see the order they spawned in, Ithraz will face the direction of the soak puddle he's about to hit. Ithraz will cast Ravenous Feast. This is a group soak that does physical damage and will also consume 1 stack of Eternal Venom on you and knock you back, and apply a short debuff that prevents you from soaking again. Making sure you have players remove stacks of the debuff will be crucial with this mechanic, but you also need to stagger the people you send in because the group soak still does a lot of damage that needs to be split. Coiling Ichor will be applied to several players and deals increasing amounts of damage over time until it expires, where it will then spawn a blood pool under that player's feet. You want to try to place these along the edge of the arena to save on space. At roughly 2:15 and 5:15 into the fight, both snakes will submerge and then re-emerge, with Vexul appearing in the middle and Ithraz appearing at the opposite side of the platform you were just at. Vexul will start a cast called Vile Flood. and there will be these green balls underneath it that will be rotating in a direction. This indicates which direction this channel is going to move, and you want to go to just behind where it's going to go so you can follow it. Getting hit by this beam will deal a lot of damage and constantly apply Eternal Venom stacks to you. While Vexul is doing this, Ithras will be dancing and spawning these red puddles on the platform that you'll need to dodge. After Vile Flood finishes channeling, Vexul will submerge again, and then re-emerge next to where Ithras is, and you repeat phase 1. That sums up the fight on Heroic. On Mythic, there are a few changes. Eternal Venom can now only stack up to 9 times before it kills you. In addition, if you die while afflicted by Eternal Venom, you'll remove up to 3 stacks of the debuff and spawn as many Caustic Globules near your corpse. When Vexul channels Caustic Deluge, Ithras will also cast Blood Torrent to the same tank, which will apply a stacking healing absorb. In addition, when the Caustic Globules spawn, they will be protected by a barbed bulwark, preventing them from being soaked. You need to use any hard CC effects like stuns or disorients to remove this so you can soak them. Ithras will cast Rouse the Brood when Vexul spawns her adds. Ithras' adds will rapidly spawn along the left and right side of where the bosses are, as well as the middle in between the 2 bosses. You need to interrupt their cast of Visceral Burst, or it will deal massive raid damage and apply a dot. There are 14 of these kicks in total, and once you interrupt one of these, they will despawn and spawn another one. When Ithras casts Ravenous Feast, he will also spawn Tainted Blood Orbs. These orbs last 8 seconds and need to have players soak them, and be healed as the orbs absorb healing received. Otherwise, if they are not fully healed up, they will explode and wipe the raid. There are 3 of these orbs, with one spawning on range on the left, one in range on the right, and one in melee. You ideally want to use the knockback effect from the tank soak to knock you towards your subsequent orb soak. And that's Twin Fangs on Heroic and Mythic difficulty. Moving on to the last boss for the purpose of these guides, the Coiled Altar. For the Coiled Altar, I'll only be talking about Heroic as we weren't able to make it super far into Mythic, and by the time most players reach this boss, there will be more comprehensive resources available. Coiled Altar is a 3-phase encounter. Phase 1 and 2 are mostly single target, and Phase 3 is predominantly 2-target cleave. There is an intermission before Phase 3 with a 100% damage amp. Phase 1 and 2 are unique in their mechanics where Phase 3 sort of fuses the 2 phases together, we have to deal with both bosses at the same time. Phase 1's main mechanic is Toxic Deluge. This will spawn green orbs after a delay indicated by the green circles. If you collide with these green orbs, you will absorb the orb and gain a short debuff that when it expires will drop the orb at your current location. This is really important because the tank mechanic Sever is a frontal cone that will destroy these orbs permanently, and apply a raid-wide dot called Venom Rupture based on how many orbs were destroyed. So you'll need to have mobile ranged players and the off-tank ferry these orbs and gather them up in a location so you can cleave them down. In testing, we just chose one of the existing orbs to build around, but you can also just have set locations where you set up orbs to aim the frontal at. As for other mechanics in this phase, Fangs of the Coiled Altar will spawn these poison pools near the sides of the arena. These pools will grow larger each time the boss casts this in this phase. This will usually coincide with a Toxic Deluge, with some orbs spawning inside these pools. Axe Grinder will spawn these rotating axes that you'll need to avoid. Guillotine will target a random player with a group soak that when it goes off will spawn a much larger circle you'll need to move out of. Targets that soak this will get a debuff that prevents them from soaking again for about 2 minutes, meaning you'll need to set up multiple groups of players to soak this. Phase 2 starts when you kill Zul'Jan, and it matters when and where he dies. If there are any active green orbs, they will immediately detonate and apply Venom Rupture to the raid based on how many were up. In addition, in the intermission between the end of Phase 2 and the start of Phase 3, Zul'Jan will be resurrected and have a damage amp applied to him. You want to try to kill him in a corner ideally to try to make that phase easier. Phase 2 is all about Hexlord Malakras, who will spawn in the middle of the room when Zul'Jan dies. He has his own set of mechanics you'll have to contend with. Dread March will mind control several players and apply an absorb shield to them. While they are mind controlled, they will walk towards the edge of the arena. If they reach it, they will leap off to their death. When this absorb shield breaks, it will break the mind control and 2 manifestations of dread will spawn. Those will fixate towards a random player. These manifestations of dread are untargetable adds that will move towards their fixated player unless that player is facing them. If it reaches the target, it will apply Dread March to them. It's important to identify if you are fixated either by your debuff or the purple eyes over your character and face your spirit. Similarly to Phase 1, the tank mechanic Soul Sever is a frontal cone that will destroy any manifestations of dread it hits. This means that the fixated players want to kite and group their spirits up for the tank so they can aim the frontal and kill them. For the tank, getting hit by Soul Sever will also spawn these 3 spirits that you need to collect or you will die. Gloom Bomb will debuff 3 random players with large purple circles. You want to move out if you have this, and when it goes off, it will spawn 3 of these spirit-looking mobs. You need to collect these by running over them, or when the secondary Gravebound debuff expires, you'll die. Spirit Cackle will summon a Spiteful Soulcoiler, a caster ad that will cast Wail of Terror. This is a long cast that if it goes off, will fear all players for 5 seconds. In testing, if you interrupted this mob, it would teleport a short distance away randomly. This ad needs to be focused down because if it reaches 100 energy, it will become immune to interrupts. Lastly, Malakras will cast Eternal Nightfall, which gives him a big absorb shield and he starts a big raid wipe cast. You just need to break the shield and interrupt him while dodging the purple swirlies he's spawning. Once Malakras is defeated, he will knock everyone back, so be careful not to get knocked off the platform and the intermission will begin. Malakras will become immune and begin channeling into Zul'jin wherever he was located when he died in Phase 1. Malakras will begin summoning these ghosts that will walk towards Zul'jin. Each ghost that reaches Zul'jin heals him and Malakras for 3% of his max HP. You can run into these ghosts to absorb them and prevent this, but doing so will deal damage to all players. During this channel, Zul'jin himself takes 100% more damage. This is why it's important to position Zul'jin's corpse well, as you want to narrow the avenues that the spirits can approach him from to make it easier to soak. Once this soul binding channel ends, Zul'jin will be resurrected and Malakras will join him. From here on, you'll be fighting both bosses at the same time, with their respective mechanics but altered slightly. Fangs of the Coiled Altar becomes Defilement of the Coiled Altar, which will apply healing absorbs to the raid instead. Guillotine becomes Grim Guillotine, which applies a healing absorb in addition to dealing more damage that needs to be split. Sever becomes Blighted Sever, which will destroy both green orbs and the manifestations of dread. During this, Malakras will retain his Dread March, Eternal Nightfall, and Gloom Bomb mechanics. You also need to kill these fellows at the same time, because once one of them is defeated, it will enrage the other one every 5 seconds until it dies. From here, the length of your Phase 3 is dependent on how well you handle the intermission, but you just deal with this chaotic Phase 3 and the bosses die. That sums up the fight on Heroic. I want to thank you for watching these boss guides. I hope they helped your understanding of the fights, and I'll see you in the next one.